Hello, and welcome to this week's message with Dr. David Mabry, lead pastor at Orange Friends Church in Lewis Center, Ohio. We're glad you're with us today. If you'd like more information about Orange Friends Church, visit our website at orangefriendschurch.org.
Y'all see this video, we're not going to show it here because of time's sake, but it would be funny to watch it. Those that, especially, I know those that are cross-country runners or appreciate, especially high school and college cross-country, you remember seeing this in the last couple of years, this young man who's running a race, and in the midst of it, he's out of nowhere comes a deer. Anyone see this? He's running along, and someone's, yeah, go, 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 and someone's, some mom or dad are recording it, and all of a sudden a deer comes out of nowhere, a bunch of deer, but one of them hits the runner and knocks him down in the middle of the race. The kid amazingly gets up and continues to run, and he does just fine. And if you haven't seen it yet, look it up and watch this. This is amazing. Normally, I always thought that this would be great. As a football player, I always thought it would be great because I didn't have a great relationship with the cross-country runners in school. Football players didn't typically have a great, but I ended up marrying a cross-country runner, and so I have much more heart for those that run for no reason. And is that too harsh? Okay, so no, and some of you know that I've since then I'm a reformed football player a little bit, so I've run. Like in the Columbus Marathon and some 5Ks and 10Ks and whatever. And so I understand it, and I understand it to a certain extent, but I always thought it would be great to have a race where there were these things you least expect, you don't expect. And like deer running. If you just set wild animals during certain sections, I think that would make the race that much more exciting. Deer is one thing. If you can dodge the deer, that's one thing. Bear? I mean, have we not thought of this yet? There's running with the bulls, that's right. That does have people actually do this. And then you think it's like, okay, so I want, honestly, does anyone, who here has done one of those warrior runs? Or, you know what I'm saying? Is it one of those runs? Yeah? Nice and high, be proud of that, right? So yeah, so that's an intentionality of setting up. Does everyone know what I'm talking about here? It's an obstacle course. Remember, like when we were kids, we were bored on the farm, and so we set up obstacle courses. Right? There's this, I'm going to race you here to here, and there's things you have to jump over, do whatever, but this is like obstacles on steroids. Not to say that everyone doing a warrior run is on steroids, but there's these major obstacles like you start the race and you intentionally put things in your way, like this, like you go through a mud pit, you have to get down and go under logs into a mud pit, and then you have to climb a giant wall and jump into another giant mud pit, and then there's this one where you run through these wires hanging, and they're electrically charged. I'm not kidding you. If you have not seen this, another great video to watch. And you run through the electrically charged, and this is a race. People actually choose to do this. They choose to run through these, and it's a warrior run. I was just show that how tough you are. And I actually I have to admit, I admire that. What would be great, though, is if we did that when people didn't expect it. See, these people trained for this craziness. They actually go into the race knowing, I'm going to have to go through this. And then you get on the other side, and you're like, you feel better, right? You're like, hey, I conquered that. But what if we did that to people that did not expect it? Wouldn't that be fun? Today's passage, Jesus is actually talking about, in a similar vein, that there's an environment where it's like a race that is run, and going into it that not everyone will finish because there are going to be some unexpected obstacles that hinder someone from finishing the race, or obstacles that not just hinder, but is just plain straight out stop them from being able to run successfully. And he uses the analogy of like a farm situation, agricultural situation. And then we have to take it from our brains, which has heavy machinery, to just a single sower, someone that has a seed in the bag and they pick it out and they're throwing it out to out on the soil because they want to sow the seed out to where it belongs. And Jesus tells this parable, and he's talking, this is interesting because he tells this parable and he's talking about it. There's intentional or there are obstacles, things that hinder the seed from having success. And he's talking like it's a natural thing, and that so many people, they don't even know that it's coming, but it happens, and it's something that we should expect that it would happen. So what I want us to look at is Matthew chapter 13, and this is the parable of the sower. And so if you may or may not be familiar with this parable, but I'll read through this. And he does this, he gives the story, the parable, and that's the primary way that Jesus taught was through story, right? He knew that it would connect with people. But what's interesting is that in this parable, he knows that it's nice story, Jesus, but he knows, because this comes up, he knows that people are going to hear the story and be like, huh? I don't understand. And they're going to walk away going, I don't understand. And the disciples even walk up to him later and say, what did that parable mean? And why do you speak in parables? He says, well, I'm speaking in parables because it sometimes confuses people. Huh? Why? So we're going to get that in a minute on why kind of there's this intentionality of Jesus of not being clear in a way. So let's just read it. Verse 1 of chapter 13, the same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and a great crowds gathered around him, so that he got into a boat and he sat down, and the whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables. So this wasn't the only one he told, but he said this one. He said, saying, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell among a path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Verse 7 then, other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. And then other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, and some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. All right, let's go. Dismissed. That's what he did. He told the story. He said, dismissed. Everyone done. And the disciples even were confused by this. Well, why do you tell this story? That's just so random. Why so random? And we have the benefit, by the way, we have to step away from the passage and say, well, especially if you've been in church any amount of time, or you kind of say, well, that's Jesus. And so we're like expecting a Jesus lesson. And so, but these folks, they're like hearing from him and it's like, huh? So the disciples pull him aside. What is that all about? And they said, well, I intentionally do this. And so let me give you, but for you guys, I'm going to give the answer. You're going to see the answer key to the test here. And so in verse 18, hear then the parable of the sower. So disciples, this is what it means. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in the heart. This is what was sown along the path. And as for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation and persecution arise on account of the word, immediately he falls away. And as for the one that was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on the good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, and he indeed bears fruit and yields, and in some cases 100-fold, and another 60, and another 30. Jesus is laying out a race that is kind of set up for some, and for others, there's no winning. There are obstacles. There are things that are in the way. And that's what we want to explore a little bit on what this really means and how we can adjust when there are obstacles, but then also when there's opportunities for spiritual success. Let me give some clarity here, some background. The first thing is that we see is that the seed is the gospel. The seed is the gospel in the parable. And the gospel going forth, the good news, and he calls it's the message of the kingdom. And the message of the kingdom is the gospel. That Jesus came, he died, he was buried, and he rose on the third day. This is the gospel. And that, because of that, those who believe in him, and that believe word is not just acknowledgement, but it's like belief and doing something they go hand in hand. So those that believe, in the truest sense of the word, have eternal life, fullness of life, right? So not just ticket to heaven, but a fullness of life now. And that's about the kingdom coming. So the seed is the gospel. Now, this is kind of a side note, but also it pertains and connects to the whole message. But as I'm walking through this, I think, man, these are things that church we need to hear. And the things that we really need to hear, and that is, the word is, in this parable, the seed is sown liberally. Now, I want us to capture this. The seed is sown liberally. The seed is the sower in the parable doesn't choose not to participate in certain areas because they go, rocky, I'm going to save my seed. I'm going to throw the seed in over here. This is good soil. Wait, that's shallow ground, and I see the birds. I see you, birds. I'm not going to throw over there. And that's a briar patch. Why in the world would I throw seed in the briar patch? I'm just going to focus on this good soil, and we're just going to throw the seed on the good soil. But you know, there's so much seed, right? When I look at my lawn, there's just so much seed that I can throw out on my lawn to some of the rougher patches. I have to go to the Home Depot or Lowe's, and I have to go get seed, and I only have so much. I've spent so much money on that. But the seed of the gospel, there's no limits. You will never run out of the seed that Jesus is talking about. So he says, get this. He says in this passage, get this with me. Church, let's hear this together. Throw the seed everywhere. Liberally. Throw the seed out there. Get it in every nook and cranny. The seed is never wasted. The seed is never wasted. He has an endless supply of seed. So cast it. Get it out there. As many places as possible. But let's also remember the rest of the parable. Sow liberally. It is only fruitful, realizing that sow liberally, but it's only fruitful part of the time. Now, that may not mean anything to you. I'd like it to mean something to you. I think Jesus wants that to mean something to you and I, to you and me. He wants us to sow liberally, but then realize that some of the seed is not going to grow in certain places. And whether you see this as, well, you're off the hook, if it doesn't really take off in one place or another, or as you're sowing the seed, you're not feeling like, I'm going to get away, birds, get out of here. This rock, I just need more water and fertilizer, and the rocky part won't do what Jesus says it's going to do. I I could just do more here. In the briar patch, what if I go in and clean out these thorns and, ow, I think I have some leather gloves here somewhere. We can really do a clearing. And he says, no, be liberal with it, but realize that the deer's going to come along and knock somebody out of the race. It's part of the story. This is what we're told. But fruitfulness is dependent upon the condition of the recipient and the environment, but never the seed. Fruitfulness is dependent upon the condition of the recipient and the environment the recipient is in, not the seed itself. It's not the gospel. Sow liberally the gospel. Now, there are two, of course, we're on two little, and not to throw too much out there, but we know we're on two parallel paths on this sermon today, this conversation. One path is, what about us? The soil that we create and that we are, and that's a sermon, and I'm going to preach that one today. And then I'm also going to preach a second sermon today, and that is, as we always keep in the back of our mind, the one that I just got done preaching there, and that is, sow liberally and recognize that not every place that you sow is going to produce a great harvest, but somewhere it will. So, diving into this, are we prepared to succeed spiritually? Are we prepared to remove obstacles or recognize obstacles and being aware of them, of ourself and our surroundings, so that the obstacles are fewer as much in our power and ability to do so? There are three areas, and you have them in the notes in front of you, that we can see each of these areas of that the seed falls upon. So the first one being an issue of education, the issue of understanding. In verses 4 and 19, so 4 is the parable and then the interpretation. So verse 4 of chapter 13, as he sowed, some of the seed fell on the path, and the birds came and devoured them. And the translation he gave is in verse 19. When everyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, that's the crux of the matter, does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown within their heart. This is what was sown along the path. So Jesus is saying it comes down to what you know, what you have come to know. It comes to a clearness of understanding. It's about asking honest questions. Be ever seeking and praying for understanding. Jesus says elsewhere on the Sermon on the Mount, he says in Matthew 7:7, he says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be open to you. A genuine seeking for this depth of understanding. Chapter 1 of Colossians, Paul is writing to the church of Colossae, and he writes in verse 9, and so from this day forward, he says, this is my prayer. I've not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. So a prayer for wisdom and understanding. James extends this a little bit more and says this about lacking wisdom. If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea and is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man and unstable in all his ways. See, oftentimes we seek wisdom in two major places, right? We seek wisdom and understanding on a Sunday morning, and from above on a Sunday morning, and then we seek for wisdom and understanding from below when we leave and go about our everyday lives. But the two don't mix very well. You're either going to get wisdom from above or you're going to get wisdom from below. They're in contradiction for one another. You ever have a stew that's put together? Maybe grandma or mom used to put together a stew, and you put your meat in there and potatoes and other vegetables and your broth, and you make this really good stew. But what if mama decided one day just to put a little bit of arsenic in there? Family's dead. Everyone dies, right? It's just a little bit. And that's where wisdom from above and wisdom from below don't mix at all. And so seeking for wisdom from above, removing the obstacle, so the two don't mix together, it's an obstacle to spiritual success. And the idea is to ask honest questions, be ever seeking, and pray for understanding. I teach a group, I'm teaching a group New Testament about the Bible, teach a survey of New Testament for a group of people. A couple are Christians, a couple are not Christians, and one of them is from a different religious movement that is not Christian. He's Jehovah's Witness. And so in this setting, as I'm teaching them, I shared with them recently, and I've said this time and time again, I said, I don't mind at all ever answering questions about the Bible and about Jesus and about spiritual things and having conversations. In fact, I love to sit down with someone who is not a Christ follower and answer genuine questions. I love it. I think some of the greatest questions come out, and I like to be sharpened by it, as well as I don't like being a know-it-all. It's kind of like, well, that's a great question, and kind of exploring. When they're honest and open questions. Now, when it's combative, and it's like, well, I just want to poke and prod and see if I can get you. Get the pastor or get the Christian. If we could trick the Christian, we're all set. And it's like, no, let's not play trick the Christian. Let's just have a great conversation. And if you have genuine questions, I love that. I don't mind that you're not a believer yet. In fact, let's have these great conversations together and have this. And that's that seeking understanding. We're truly wanting to have wisdom. Honest seeking, honest questions go a long way. Be ever seeking, and then for us to pray for understanding. But in the midst of this, we know we've just been guaranteed that not everyone's going to hear clearly. Not everyone's going to have understanding. We sow liberally, and those that don't have understanding, we kind of say, okay, well, you move on. And if I'm sitting with someone and there's not quite understanding, I don't take it upon myself to say, we are not leaving this space until you fully grasp what this is about. And then we're going to kneel right here in the coffee shop and you're going to accept Jesus. Ready? Let's go. We're for the long haul. It's a marathon meeting. No. Having a conversation, and we're ready to move on, we move on. And if the questions aren't answered, that's okay. But we'll do the best of answering what I can. But honest questions and seeking. The next thing we see is, for the next soil, is an area not of education, but of reputation. So verses 5 and 6, he gives the parable. It fell on rocky soil, and they didn't have much soil, and immediately it sprang up. So there's no depth. And when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. The translation in verse 20 and 21 then, as for the one sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Woo! Excitement. But then has no root in himself, but endures for a little while and may make it a little bit. But when tribulation and persecution arise on account of the word, immediately falls away. Can I do something with that verse right there? If we can do this, I think this is helpful. It's helpful for me to read this verse this way. Let's read the last part like this. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a little while. And when, we're going to add a word, when inevitable tribulation and persecution arise on account of the word, immediately they fall away. Now, I know the word inevitable is not in there. But can we safely add it? Can we safely say, from everything that we see, from what Jesus taught, from maybe what we've experienced, is that persecution, tribulation, difficult times, harassment because of your faith is inevitable. Now, in our culture, maybe less so. I mean, if someone snickers or looks at you because you're a Christian, it's like, kind of like, they're comparatively, we're not close to other parts of the world. In fact, most of the world. I mean, when there are a couple dozen Coptic Christians killed on Palm Sunday because of a terrorist bomb, and specifically because they're Christians, I'd say we're at the Ritz-Carlton of acceptance for our faith in our culture here, right? We've got it easy. Now, that's not to minimize what may arise. Persecution, though, and tribulation and difficulty still happen, but maybe in a different way here. I think more from when we recognize that our reputation is at stake in other ways. So this means that we're counting the cost and rejecting the comfortable, the comfort that good reputation has, or a certain reputation rather has. It's rather who we know or what they think of you, those that you do know what they think of you. So Proverbs 20:25 says, don't trap yourself by making a rash promise to God and only later counting the cost. Jesus teaches in Luke chapter 14, this section, these 10 verses, he gives us several. He hits us over and over again about the cost of discipleship and what it would take. He says, now great crowds accompanied him again, and he turned to them and he said to them, if anyone comes to me, and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sister, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Let's not go over this quickly. I know it's jewelry. I know we have a cross here. We're familiar in our culture. They're on tombstones. But here's the thing. That is like an electric chair. That is like lethal injection. This is like a guillotine. It was an object for the Romans for mass murder. It's for an executioner. The cross is not a pretty thing. The cross is a horrific thing. Yes, it's jewelry. Yes, we're purposeful that it's symbolic because while it's horrific, it's a symbol of sin and shame that appeared that Jesus died on the cross, but it's also it's victory. But it's a guillotine. So when Jesus is saying to this crowd, unless you're willing to take up your cross and follow me, he's talking about execution. I don't know that we fully grasp that in our culture and society, right? Our reputation's at stake. I mean, Christianity, it's so radical. It is. Christianity is radical. And I'm not talking about being goofy for goofy's sake or that being offensive because you're just normally offensive anyhow. It's being offensive because of Jesus, right? And we know people that have bad reputations just because they're just not very likable people. But what about having a reputation because you are a Christ follower because it's so extreme? He says, take up your cross and follow me. It's no wonder that Jesus said that seed was sown on certain soils and it was sprung up and said, whoopee, I'm a Christian now. I'm going to follow Jesus and I know what I'm getting into. And he's like, no, you don't. You have no idea what you're getting into. And he turns to his disciples and say, just so you know, there's a huge crowd around here, but they're all going to turn their back on me. In fact, you're also going to turn your back on me. Jesus had this knack for shrinking a crowd. One of the key verses is this, and it's probably memorable because of the reference itself, but John chapter 6, verse 66. Get it? 666. Some of you won't, that's okay. But it says that after that time, some left him and never followed. Some of his disciples never followed again because he had a really difficult teaching for them. They're like, what? You want us to what? That means what? No. We were pretty excited when you were handing out the free fish and loaves. When the buffet was open, Jesus, We're good with that. And man, when you healed the blind guy, that's amazing. Are you kidding? We've never seen that. It's better than TV. They didn't have TV. This is great. They were attracted to him, and all of a sudden he pulls out, if you want to follow me, you have to take up the guillotine, carry that electric chair. And it's not just carrying the cross. If you carried a cross, you were headed to the hill. And you were going to be nailed to the cross. It wasn't like metaphor, like, yes, I'm just carrying the cross for somebody else. And when you get there, it's going to be like, God's going to be like, just kidding. You don't really have to sacrifice. Just wanted to see if you do it. No, it's pretty much you're putting your whole reputation on the ground. Sometimes, and the reason I'm pounding this is because here's the thing. Sometimes I think we sell a bad bill of goods to people when we throw the seed out. Because we don't want to turn people off. We don't give them the whole message. We just, hey, if we can get you in the door, hang out with us for a little bit, and then you'll like us, and then later on, we'll share the secret behind the curtain. Give up all for the sake of Jesus. Come and die with Jesus. Hate your father, mother, sister, brother, wife, even your very own life for Jesus. But now that you're engaged with us so much, you can't say no. Now that you're used to the social surroundings, we have a really good thing going here, don't we? We enjoy one another's company. We eat well at our get-togethers. We do social action every once in a while. We feel really good about what we do. We're a happy church. We're friendly people. And you know what, really, let's be honest. What's behind the curtain here? Yeah, just okay. Be like us. Just kind of embrace it a little bit and say, yep, I surrender all. No wonder Jesus said that at first it's like, yippee. And then it's like, what? Are you serious? No, I have a reputation. I mean, would I really go through that? And he goes on in this Luke passage. He says, what king going out to encounter another king for war would say, not first sit down and be deliberate whether he's able to even with his 10,000 to meet him who comes against with 20,000. And if not, while the other is a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, anyone who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. He says right before that, he says, who in the world, for which of you desiring to build a tower? So these are construction guys, right? Who would build a tower and not first sit down and count the cost, whether they have enough money, enough to complete it? Otherwise, he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish. All that see it will begin to mock him, saying, that man began to build and was not able to finish. Ha! What a chump. But Jesus never let the crowd control the truth. Jesus never let the crowd control the truth. The last area of the soils that it doesn't fare too well is areas of possession. Areas of possession. And so other seed, verse 7 and verse 22, other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. And as for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. This is about how much you own. This is about keeping your possessions in perspective. So the first one is someone just doesn't understand. They're like, huh? And it doesn't connect. The next one, it's like, well, yeah, I understand. But then all of a sudden, this is painful. Are you kidding? I'm now realizing what does this entail. I'm out of here. And then the third one is like, I really like my stuff. I really like my stuff. In fact, I don't only like my stuff, but I like other people's stuff as well. And that's what has my heart. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, in the Sermon on the Mount, once again, he says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Pretty straightforward. Some of the seed will fall on ground where people may spring up, but thorns will come and choke, and that is that the cares of this world, the riches of this world will come around, and it's just way too important. I talk about not only like life in America, but specifically and particularly for all our cultural context here in southern Delaware County, the northern metropolitan Columbus area. We're in the land of plenty. Even the poorest are wealthy, super wealthy, comparatively. Oh, Pastor, you have no idea. I'm still struggling. Really? Really? Come to Haiti with us in July. And let's revisit the conversation about wealth. Come with us, please. And then let's talk about who's poor. We have these riches, and I'd have to say it's probably one of the biggest curses we have. Because wealth can become, and there's nothing wrong with being wealthy. It's a perspective. It's how one approaches. Because there is going to be good soil, flourishing soil that they have wealth. But this is when wealth chokes it out and says, it gets things out of balance, and wealth becomes the centerpiece rather than Jesus. A spirit of generosity is absent because it's forgetting that when we do take up our cross and follow Jesus, when we leave all, we're saying, you have all my finances too. And so it's this forgetting that all this is in his hands. It's a tool for him. And so I use my wealth for the spreading of more seed. That's what it's about, getting it out there. So finally, he has this true path of success. Not to keep beating on the negative, the obstacles to the race, the things that are more of a challenge, but let's go to the good soil. So seed fell on the good soil and it produced 100-fold, some 60, some 30. In verse 23, the interpretation is the word falls on the heart, and they hear it, they understand it, and they indeed bear fruit that yields a whole gob, a whole bunch. So there are three things that stand out to me here is that when it falls on good ground, it means that these are the opposite of the other soils that are out there, the other places that the seed goes, but that first and foremost that we are taught by him. True spiritual success, fruitful ground is that we are taught by him. He is our education. We go deep with Jesus. And this is about spiritual formation, is placing ourselves in a situation where we can be spiritually formed. Intentionally, we want to be spiritually formed. This isn't necessarily about knowing more, like I know more of the Bible than everybody else. And it's like you are super Christian. No, it's being spiritually formed because you can know an awful lot about the Bible, but not be spiritually formed. You can be spiritually held back and immature. And so this is about being spiritually formed, being taught by him more and more each day. So going deep with Jesus. And this is what I encourage is that, listen, we as a church then, this is that other parallel path, we as a church and as people of God saying, that's where we really need to invest. Let's spread the seed wide, but let's take people deep. Let's be committed to help people go deep with Jesus, to be spiritually formed. This has to be a high priority, which I love to see this happening in one-on-one discipleship and in small groups and even in informal conversations. Love to see that. The second one sounds very similar, but it's to know him. It's to know him. It's to hear and do. That Hebrew word for this is Shema. And so Shema is to hear. But it was impossible to use the word in the Old Testament to hear without thinking at the same time that it goes in the ears and it's put into application immediately. In the Hebrew scripture, you would never separate hearing and doing. It was always one thing. That's why they only have one word for it, Shema. And that is hear. If you hear of Jesus, you do it. It's the two sides of one coin. I think I brought my coin with me. This is called a challenge coin. Now, this challenge coin is particularly given to every pastor within Evangelical Friends Church Eastern Region. And so and there are other challenge coins that are for military and for law enforcement. But this challenge coin, it's impossible to see this coin without seeing that it has two sides. You cannot have a coin with one side. It's not a coin by nature, right? It's impossible. In the same way, see our hearing is the same way. Hearing and doing are two sides of the exact same coin, and you cannot have them separated at all. That's why it's absurd for us to say, well, I hear you, Jesus, but not have your life changed and transformed. The third area would be to trust him. Trust him means that you're focused on growing and applying faith and expect fruit. Expect fruit. If Jesus said it, I believe it. If he said that when you cast the seed on good soil that it will grow, I believe it. I believe it's going to happen. I believe it is happening. I expect it. By faith. You just say, yeah, that's a done deal. When he said that some seed will fall on some soil that doesn't do too hot, I believe him. And when I see that, I think, okay, I could prioritize my time. I could prioritize my time. Ultimately, fruitfulness is then the result of perseverance and understanding, a deeper understanding of him, and then persevering through those times that materialism comes up, your reputation, persecution, tribulation come up, and those times that you don't quite understand. But it's persevering through those times. It seeks to, this is a process, true spiritual success is to seek to remove obstacles and make the gospel clear. It's about embracing the eternal gospel rather than temporary pleasure. So our job is to water and fertilize good soil, to cast the seed wide, to water and fertilize good soil, to not water rocks, to not chase birds, and to not get caught in a briar patch. This is our goal. So my friends, two sermons, two paths. First path is this. Today, what are you and I doing to place ourselves in a situation where we're living out this good soil? We seek a deeper understanding. We pray for wisdom and believe that it's coming. We say, you know what? My reputation makes no difference. I'm taking a bold stand for Christ, take up my cross daily and follow him. I read what the cost of discipleship is, and there's no turning back. My life is different. I want it to be different, and I want it to be different day by day. I want to say, even if you've been coming to church for like ever, you still have areas that you could be spiritually formed. Otherwise, you're in denial and perhaps one of the other soils. But we're always seed constantly put into us, constantly growing. And the other area is having possessions in order as well. The last thing that I want to point out here is actually the verse 9 of chapter 13. And I like the Message translation of this, because typically in a translation you probably have in yours is that he who has ears, let him hear. That's nice. That's a nice way to say it. It's like my mom always used to say, it's like, oh, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means you need to listen twice as much, right? It's like, so you have ears, listen. If you can't hear me, clean them out. So Jesus is saying, if you have ears, listen. And so the Message version of this is that it's like this. Are you listening to this? Really listening? This is what Jesus is saying to us today in verse 9. Are you listening to this? Are you really listening? And that's the challenge that we have before us. To listen and obey. Two sides of that exact same coin. Will you pray with me? This day, O God, We wish to be fully devoted, jump off the deep end disciples. We not only want to see what's supposedly behind that curtain, we want to embrace it. We choose this day to give up all, to surrender all of our supposed rights and privileges. We choose this day to set aside the flesh, those things that we really have a hankering to do, but we know it's not what you want. Oh God, move in our hearts. God, give us the wisdom and strength to throw the seed wide. Help us to take others deep in you as we go deeper, further up and further in. Right in this moment, heads bowed and eyes closed, will you take a moment to make this personal? Will you just say a silent prayer, or even in your spirit, will you just pray what's on your heart and mind right now? A prayer of surrender, a prayer of discipleship. Take just the next 30 seconds to make this very personal. Maybe something stood out in today's sermon. Will you just make it personal? Jesus, if we ask, we will receive. If we will seek, we will find. If we knock, the door will be opened. And right now, we pray believing by faith that you are answering these prayers that have gone up before you. We do not waver, but we stand firm on your promises that you are speaking even now to each and every person that is humbly and honestly speaking to you about their specific heart condition. We thank you and we praise you. In the precious name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Well, go with God and be at peace.
You've been listening to Dr. David Mabry, lead pastor at Orange Friends Church in Lewis Center, Ohio. Do you have a question or a comment for Pastor David? Would you like to share your story or how Pastor David's messages have helped you in your journey with the Lord? We would love to hear from you. Please email us at transformed@orangefriendschurch.org. Join us next week for another relevant Christ-centered message. This podcast is a production of Orange Friends Church in Lewis Center, Ohio. For more information, please visit our website at orangefriendschurch.org. Thank you and have a wonderful week.